The concept of mind palaces is hardly a new one. We've got records of them being described in the West going back into antiquity, with the Greek poet Simonides of Chios being an early example, and of course Giordano Bruno and Sherlock Holmes. There's actually a plethora of great minds who have used the method, quite specifically as a way to effectively and efficiently store information for later recall. The concept itself is simple enough and probably known to most people watching. You imagine a large building, maybe one you know, maybe one you invent yourself, and you create a narrative as you walk around the place, leaving little clues for yourself as you go around, so that you can then spot the clues as you then visualize yourself going through the narrative again at a later date. So, to recall the folk names given to foxglove, for example, namely witch gloves, gloves of Our Lady, fairy's glove, dead men's bells, fox bells, cow flop, the great herb, fairy weed, fairy fingers, and fairy caps, one might picture a cathedral in the shape of a foxglove flower and imagine walking over to a chapel, being greeted by a kindly old crooked-nosed hag who takes off her gloves for you to take into the chapel and place onto the hands of a statue of Mary, but as we do so, a fairy playfully comes in and runs off with one of the gloves. We look around and we see that one of the catafalques is open, and inside are two dead men, each clasping a shiny golden bell in their hands. Again, in a testament to how poorly guarded this cathedral is, a fox runs up and lifts one of the shiny bells out of the dead men's hands and runs off with them. You watch as the fox runs out of the cathedral and you hear a big splash. You run outside and you find a big swimming pool with a cow happily splashing around in it. It's just taken a big jump from the high diving board. And there next to the pool is an enormous, sentient, grey Volkswagen Beetle with the number 53 on it, clearly appreciating the show. And sitting at the wheel, watching with a big grin on her face, is the fairy with her one glove, with a gardening fork or whatever else you might imagine, that I won't be mentioning in a monetized YouTube video, held between her fingers, with a baseball cap firmly on her head. It might sound outlandish, but actually, as it turns out, the more outlandish, the more likely you are to remember it. You can give it a try by pausing the video and trying to recall the names by yourself right now. You might surprise yourself. Incidentally, if you're enjoying the video, so far at least, please click on the like button and subscribe, and click on the little bell button if you haven't already, because this really helps the videos get seen by others. And memberships might also be something to look into if you want access to the Foolish Fish Discord server, among other perks. Thanks in advance, it really means a lot to me. Okay, where were we up to? So this is the way most people know to use mind palaces, as an aid to memory. Mind palaces have also popularly been used in spiritual practices over the years. In the mid-16th century, Saint Theresa of Avila wrote about a place that had been revealed to her in vision, a so-called interior castle that's helped countless Christian mystics on their respective spiritual journeys over the past few centuries. And of course, most recently, we have the modern practitioner teacher Aidan Wachter, who has given us the marvellous watchtower practice described in his hugely influential and appreciated book, 6 Ways. However, the variation that I wish to share with you today was inspired by a comment from a viewer, Toady UK, who shared this experience a little over a year ago in a video that I posted on fear and magical protection. You can go and check it out, I've pinned the comment there. But in essence, Toady UK describes a process passed down by an intriguing uncle figure, whereby the practitioner spends time building up a mental image of a building and its surrounding area. And initially the point is just to spend time there, as much time as possible, exploring the various nooks and crannies and hidden rooms and gardens and so on, at every opportunity, whenever you get a chance to daydream, whether it's standing in a queue, or commuting, or under the shower, or lying in bed before falling asleep. After some time becoming familiar with the place, I think it was around 1 year in this case, Toady UK was told to make one of the rooms particularly special and add strong protections, padlocks and bolts and so on. This eventually became a much appreciated safe haven for Toady UK during some particularly worrying brushes with the scarier side of magical practice. Now, over the past few weeks I've been experimenting with this concept, albeit from the perspective of a grown-up with a few years of practice under my belt, and I thought it might be worth sharing my own experience so far, just realizing that there are probably no limits to what can be done with such a place. You can naturally take inspiration from the following description, or you can do entirely your own thing. Either way, I hope you find it useful. Step 1. Pick your setting. In my case, I created a very large grassy area with woods and a lake and many other topographical features that I won't describe here. After all, it is a fiercely private place. It would be hard to imagine a more private place than this, but I think it's worth sharing the broad strokes here. Step 2. Secure the area. The very next thing I did was to set up an elaborate protective ward of my own device all around this place. Just a gigantic invisible dome over the whole area with all kinds of wards and protective words and names infused into it just to keep anything or anyone uninvited out. The wards that I used may or may not be suitable for you. Either way, you can just think of the most protective concepts and words and so on that you know, and imagine those going into whatever barrier you create. There's no right or wrong way to do it. Just trust your instinct and do it in the most effective way you can imagine. You can always add more later when you learn more or better ones. Step 3. Secure the area a bit more. Just think to the last time you heard a magic practitioner say, "I wish I'd taken fewer precautions." I didn't think so either. So the next thing that I did was to create one or more ferocious guardians. More as a deterrent, as a courtesy to any would-be intruders, just to avoid them the trouble of discovering for themselves the consequences of trying to pass that protective barrier uninvited. You get the idea. I feed the guardians certain foods they like every time I visit, and then with the place reasonably well secured, I was able to get to work on the building. Step 4. Create the entrance to the building. Again, I won't describe it in detail. For privacy reasons, sure, but also because I wouldn't want to influence you in your own processes. With the guardians in place, I was able to walk up to the entrance of the building and dream that up. Now, the first thing to mention is that there was a small amount of effort involved in getting started here. I did have to set aside a time and actively decide to do this and sit in silence as I figured out in my mind's eye what the entrance would look like and what I would see when I passed the threshold. But I'd be lying if I said that I consciously made decisions about every architectural aspect of it. My initial expectation was that my whole palace would have this Art Nouveau style that I really love in the material world. But the style that I've actually discovered there has completely changed my mind. I'm very happy with what I kind of got instead, so to speak. But yes, just to say that the process, not just for the entrance, but for the whole building, has been much more akin to one of discovery than to one of creation. Okay, so back to the entrance. For me, this was a really nice moment, walking up to these open doors and stepping into my own domain and taking a first look around at what I could already see just beyond those front doors. Noting the positions of areas to be discovered, areas to be filled in at a later date during a subsequent visit, but just getting a feeling of being at home. That was a really nice experience. Step 5, exploring the rooms. So, to begin with, of course, I had no idea what final shape the building would take. And I admit that it's still a work in progress and probably will continue to be so for a very long while. Many years, I expect. Yes, you can imagine that my first creation was a temple with an elaborate altar and a specially chosen ceiling, which again I won't describe to avoid influencing you. But I now decorate that room every morning with coloured drapes and certain gifts on the altar. And I have an assistant who tidies the place up while I sleep. So another employee there, so to speak. Again, I feed this assistant every time I visit. You can find out more about servitors in this other video I made, by the way. But essentially the process has been like this. Little by little, day by day, I decide I want this kind of room over here and a staircase over there, and when I walk around the building I see this and that and the other, and this is the room where the servitor lives, and this is the place I can just sit to find peace and quiet and recenter myself. And of course this is the very nice library, and so on. And every time I go to discover a new room, it's always like I'm lifting this fog of war, for those of you who play video games. As I said, the process is much more akin to one of discovery than to one of creation. I mean, sure, I do have to consciously decide that there's a door over here and I need this kind of room behind it for whatever purpose. But then I'll go towards the door and push it open, and the room that I discover won't always be exactly what I expected it to be. Though so far I've been really happy with every aspect that I've discovered like this. Step 6. Visit regularly. In fact, this step has come quite naturally as the various rooms have become useful for certain aspects of my everyday life. For example, now that I'm self-employed, it's been a struggle to find the right balance between work and life, and I was finding that I was often working until late into the night, and then just being exhausted the next day, which of course is completely inefficient. So I've created a room with a fireplace that I light when it's time to work, and that I put out when it's time to stop. As a little anecdote here, I was actually still finding that I was thinking about work after the fire was supposed to be extinguished. And I'd go into the work fire room and find that the fire was back on. So now I actually ask my cleaning servitor to clean the place out at the end of every working day, and I stay there for the fraction of a second that it takes for that to happen. And then I place an avocado on the hearth. I have no idea why, but it works. For some reason, there's no way a fire can be there when there's an avocado there. Who am I to argue? And I can tell you that now I have very restful evenings, unless I specifically decide not to. No slipping into default work mode when I'm supposed to be spending time with my loved ones or trying to sleep. And it also helps me stay focused when I'm supposed to be working. This is a huge benefit and definitely worth considering if you work from home. A final consideration. Okay, to wrap up, here's a question you might care about. Is my mind palace structurally sound? In truth, I've tried to make it as coherent as possible, just because I think it'll be more likely to sustain itself while I'm not there if it doesn't have to defy logic on top of just existing. So this just means that I wouldn't have two rooms overlapping, for example, or a window that overlooks a garden, only to find that there's another room if you approach that wall from the other side. So would it pass a check from a trained architect? Absolutely not. Well, probably not. But it's as coherent as I can make it, and that really is good enough. There we are. I think that's probably as much as I can really share without making my palace a public space, which would kind of defeat the point. What about you? Do you have an interior palace that you visit regularly, or that's an integral part of your practice? Leave a comment below if there's anything that you can share that other viewers might find useful. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this short explanation, and I hope you find it helpful in creating a palace of your own for whatever purposes you might have. I'd just like to take a second to say thank you to the now over 100,000 viewers who have so kindly clicked the subscribe button. I really can't begin to tell you how much this means to me, and if you haven't subscribed yet, of course, right now might be the opportunity you've been waiting for. Also, if you found the video useful or at least intriguing, please consider hitting the like button, as that always helps these videos get seen by a wider audience. And if you'd like to support the channel in a more direct way, do consider joining the Foolish Fish memberships that start at just $2 a month, and that give you access to the Foolish Fish Discord server, where you can come and chat with me and with lots and lots of other members to share tips and ideas for your own practice, whatever it might be, with over 260 different channels covering the different aspects of occult and esoteric theory and practice. It's an enormous repository of knowledge and definitely worth checking out. Speaking of which, let me say a huge thank you to the channel members. Without you, there's no way I'd be able to still be doing what I do here. I'm deeply grateful for your generous contributions and for the welcoming, respectful, and incredibly helpful community you've created over on the Discord server. In particular, a huge thanks to Anthony John Reinhardt, our single level Infinity Lux Eternal level member, and also to our level 3 Magister Venerabilis members that you can see scrolling up on the left there. And thanks finally to every single one of you for watching, especially if you've made it up to the end. Take care of yourselves and of each other, and see you soon with another video.